Welcome to The Curated Craftsman, a podcast where we'll learn about the hands, head, and heart behind creative entrepreneurs just like you. Kate Cook is the artistic drive behind Asphalt Canvas Custom Art and your host for this conversation about art, business, and belief.
Thank you for tuning in to the Curated Craftsman podcast. We're going to get to know the hands, head, and heart behind Lyn Hiner, an internationally recognized fine artist whose palette knife paintings of florals and automobiles have been featured and collected all over the world, from Beverly Hills, California to Japan and Saudi Arabia. After studying art at the Pratt Institute in New York, Lyn initially pursued a career in business. Stemming from her passion for cars, passed down from her father, she accepted a position as a tradeshow manager for performance racing industry, where she worked for nearly a decade. Unfortunately, a horrific and unrelated accident found Lyn in the hospital for a year, where she underwent surgeries and occupational therapy. It was at this time where she dove back into her love for art as a form of therapy and healing, and birthed the idea for her now highly sought after and signature petals and petrol collections. Today, Lyn travels the country showcasing her work at a multitude of distinguished art and car events. Among her impressive list of accolades, Lyn and her husband and teammate Rob have officially opened an appointment-only studio in San Clemente, California, as well as launched an international collaboration officially called Lyn Hiner Studios Japan. We'd like to thank you for joining us, Lyn, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me, my friend. This is quite an honor.
Thank you. I would love to start with your childhood or your high school years with your dad, because I think that plays a lot into your story. And then we'll just kind of move through your timeline until here recently, because I know there's a lot of interesting things happening in your life recently as well.
Yeah, I'd say definitely later is more interesting than earlier, but
yes, we can do a quick time jump. But I did see on your website that your dad was interested in motorsports, racing, Porsches, things like that. And that's kind of where you got your initial love for cars. But I didn't see where you were into art at a young age. Was that something that was interesting to you at a young age?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, they were in tandem, very hand in hand. The car part of it, my dad, even long before I was born, he would find field finds, not barn finds. They'd be like legit field finds. First one was a 356. It goes barely duct taped together, but he got it in working order enough that he was able to then buy a 356 Continental, and that he could tinker with and do a little amateur racing. And then by the time I came along, it was a 911 that he had, that he bought off of a pilot who had brought it over from Germany. And let's see, he got that when I was around 4 or 5, and then crashed it probably 4 years later. So yeah, and totaled it. So there's stories behind that, but we'll leave that. That's probably going to be in a book someday.
Oh my gosh.
My dad.
He lived, right? I mean, like, he made it through that? Okay.
Yes. He did actually. My sweet dad passed only a couple of years ago, but that was where the car side of my journey is. The art side of my journey was, the box of Crayola and the palette of watercolors that every kid has, especially if you grew up in the 70s when phones and things didn't exist. You either were outside, kicked outside until it was dark, or you were inside and you had a coloring book and crayons. And so my love of art started very young, but it continued through high school. I actually had the privilege of living with both my mom and her husband, and then my dad and his wife growing up. And so I had very different experiences in very different places that all built themselves into work ethic, a love of art, a love of beauty, and a love of travel. Really, I guess, is all of that came from being able to live with both sets of parents in that regard. I mean, obviously I'm not a proponent of, hey, get a divorce, but
yeah, of course.
But in my case, I found both sides were a blessing. There were some bad things and some not good things in that, but ultimately getting to be with my dad in my high school years. He was the guy who, even though a super intellect, you are art first, street smart second, go find your way and do it and find a way to make money at it kind of guy. So So that was where that came from. So when I was applying for schools, for the 5 were art schools, and he was like, now don't be upset if you don't get into, your couple of top picks. It's going to be okay. There'll be other options. And so when 4 out of the 5 came back that I got into, and the only one that I didn't get into was the academic school, and he was like, huh, all right, I guess we'll go. Which one has the best package?
That's awesome. What a blessing.
So, yeah, it was a huge blessing.
You and I are friends from kind of a couple years back, and so I know your faith plays a big role in just your everyday life and your business. Is he the one that kind of instilled that in you, or was that your
Nope.
mom?
Nope,
where
not
did you
either
get
one
that
of them.
Really? Oh, wow. Okay. So where did that come from?
I came to faith in my 20s, actually, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. I know God was doing a mighty work even before that. One of my dad's wives has the distinction of being mom number 2 in my mind. This is Marie, and she was a woman of deep faith. And so her peace and her love was an early indicator of what that looked like, even though I didn't subscribe to it. But once I surrendered my life to Christ, she was the first person I started talking to about it. But my husband, it's a couple of steps, right? It's never just like a done
like
thing.
a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it was not a moment for me. First of all, with all the intellects in our family, it was going to be the thing that was going to be tested, because not everyone agrees with it in my family, and that's okay. I
Absolutely.
can respect that. And I don't force it down their throat. I probably did a little bit when I was newly in my faith, but I don't anymore. That's each person's decision. But my mom passed when I was 20, and I had cried out and asked God, if you actually exist here, this doesn't make sense to me. I need to know you exist. And the guy I was dating at the time very oddly gave me a gold cross. And he goes, I don't know why, but I feel like I need to give this to you. And I just remember thinking, thank you for letting me know you're present. That was still years before I surrendered my life. And then when I started dating my now husband, Rob, 22, and he was the one who I ended up going to church with, and we would sit at Sizzler for like 4 hours after church, and I'd be like, so what is this, and why is this, and this doesn't make sense to me, and who's Jesus, and why does he fit into this equation? And so it became all the dots started to connect there. And before we ever got married, that was not by any prodding or pushing from him, but
I think it's such a testimony for your stepmom. She may not have even realized it. It's basically her actions showed you how to live out the Bible and, be kind and loving towards people, which is that without any words about it. And I think that's the most important thing for Christian people to kind of live by, is like your actions literally speak louder than your words, especially for non-believers or people that don't even know, not just people that don't believe, but people that don't know. You gotta kind of make that question in their head, like, why are they like that? Especially like, why are they like that in that circumstance?
Yeah. By no stretch of anyone's imagination am I, any kind of perfect living Christian. I still have my foibles and faults by a long shot. I don't handle things all the time very well. I can be pretty, I guess the word that my dad has passed down to me is intense.
Do you think that being a Christian, or at least being faith-based, has helped you succeed in your said business as an artist or as an entrepreneur?
I put all of the credit to God. I mean, sure, he gave me a brain. And yes, there have been really important steps that have happened along the way. But the call to even be an artist professionally, which, let's be fair, is dumb by anyone's standards. I mean, who makes a living at this business, right? That's what most people say. So when I am sitting across the table from my husband and saying, okay, I think this is what God is calling me to, and I actually think it's going to be to the benefit and the blessing of our family, and he, with a straight face that only he can give, he's like, wouldn't you be painting right now? That was what you're supposed to do. I'm like I know, right? I know that totally would make sense. But here's the fun fact. I literally, it was painting specific. which I was a pastel artist. And I said, and I do think this is what he's planning on using as
Really?
as the catalyst for, because we talked for decades about having our own business or whatever.
Really?
And he was still working in publishing. That was where we had met in our early 20s. And he was still working in that field. And I said, I know it's crazy, but I just think that's what it is. And so in 2014, this is, of course, after I was burned pretty severely, and I'm jumping around, but I think in the intro you'd said I'd been in the hospital for a year, but I
Yeah.
had actually only been in the hospital for 10 days. The recovery was for a year.
Okay.
And the recovery was, I had surgeries up into almost exactly a year after my initial burns. And so the therapy and the surgeries and that all happened, but I was at home 10 days after my burns and my
Okay.
two most serious surgeries.
And as far as
So
the time frame goes, so you graduated at the Pratt Institute and got that job as the manager for the racing industry. And
yeah,
then,
so I didn't graduate college. I actually left after only a year.
okay,
Yeah. So I was at Pratt for a year. I
okay,
came home. I moved to Santa Barbara. I moved up to Lake Tahoe with my dad and my stepdad and my mom. And
okay.
then I moved up to Oregon with my dad and his wife. And then I went to school in New York. And then I moved back down to Santa Barbara when I knew I couldn't continue at school financially, which again was a God thing, because now at least I was on the West Coast when less than a year later, my mom found out she was terminal. So
Wow.
at that point, I was at least within driving distance. And so
Wow.
that was actually kind of an important thing. So,
Absolutely.
when you're being told your parent is so sick that, they're given 6 months, and it actually turns out that they're only going to be with you 6 more months. Those are those things that you're like, okay, I could have been in
Priorities.
school right now. And instead I'm at some insignificant job, really. I mean, in all fairness, it was an insignificant job. Once my bosses knew, they were like, yeah, go be with your mom as often as you need. And then after she passed, I decided I was going to go back to school. I looked at a couple that are incredible schools in the area, but I wanted to still work. So I looked at the Art Institute, which is now Laguna College of Art and Design.
Yes, I applied
Um,
there.
did you?
Yep.
Yeah, that place has been there a long time. So when I
Yeah.
came back from that setup and finding a job down here, the job I took was with Performance Racing Industry. And within 3 months, I was their show coordinator. And 3 months later, I was the trade show manager. School went away again. That was clearly
Wow.
not what the plan was. But that's also where I met my husband. That's where I learned my acumen for business. That's where a lot of things came
Absolutely.
from. So I
Yeah, I
always tell my
think
girls, it's not a straight line.
so. One of your collections is called Petals. I didn't know any of this about your story as far as the small details. And on your bio, anyway, it says that that series was initially called Beauty from Ashes.
Mhm.
But like your whole story so far has been that way. All of these ruined plans that seemed ruined, and then all of a sudden it was there and happened for a reason.
But you don't know that when you're going through it. And
Oh no.
even today, even with all the experiences I've had, I won't pretend like I go so gracefully all the time into transitions. I don't. I still
Same.
go, what is going on here?
Yes. Yes, we like have to know the answers then and there. You know, when I was doing my research for this, I was like, dang, that really must have helped her so much in that job you're speaking of as the manager and coordinator of all these shows and trade shows. That had to have helped you so much, unbeknownst to
Yes.
you, in what you're doing currently.
Oh, I would have never understood the value of that truly until, I mean, let's see, I was the trade show manager from 91 to 99. And during that time, I helped produce countless shows under our roof. And then we helped other businesses run their shows.
And
So the idea of having a budget, having to work on things, the aesthetic, the marketing, the business, all of it, I actually had a mind for it. And
mhm.
so it was kind of a cool deal. But my dad was always in the background asking, so when exactly are you planning on coming back to art?
Wow,
That's,
really?
yeah, that's your talent. Why aren't you doing that? Well, Dad, I'll
Wow.
get to that. I mean, if that's meant to come back, but let's be fair. I did go to school thinking I was going to be an interior designer,
Mhm.
and because you don't make money at producing art.
Of course, yeah, that's what I mean, I was told exactly the same thing by school, actually. Like, they basically train you to become an art teacher. Which there's no problem with that at all, but seems to be the only career or profession that they push fine artists into. But there's so many other ways and avenues, especially now with social media. There's so many opportunities to actually sell as a fine artist rather than being under somebody else's umbrella. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there are way more options. And I wish colleges would push that a little bit more, and like kind of cater towards the idea of you can actually be an entrepreneur, because there was no talk of that when I was in college.
And I've even had conversations with some of my very successful, very gifted artists, friends, who later have become very gifted other things that have nothing to do with art at all.
Yeah.
And when I say, I've told my kids to go to college and make sure you have a minor in business and or marketing, they go, why would you have them strip the soul out of their art already? And I go, that's not stripping the soul. That's having a mind. That's using both sides of your brain. That's not catering to one thing or another. That's being mindful.
Yes.
So
wow.
Just having a conversation with a very young artist last week, and she's asking me all these questions. And I said, at the end of this, you need to know this is not going to be easy. There's nothing about this that is easy.
Yes.
And by the way, no one's journey is exactly identical to anyone else's journey.
Yeah, there's no blueprint.
Nope.
Yes, I know. And I still do. I fall into the trap of like, oh, I'll just do it exactly like how this person does it. And no, it won't. It won't.
Nope.
And that's, I guess, the blessing and the curse, really. It's a double-edged sword, because that's kind of why we get into it, is like we want to be different from everyone, but at the same time, we want a blueprint.
Yeah.
Getting back into your timeline, was it at your house in recovery that you kind of started picking up a paintbrush again?
No. So, so there was kind of two things going on at the same time. My girls were in 3rd and 5th grade when that happened. I had been teaching privately in my home studio. Our kids' school had a Meet the Masters program going on. The team of people, they were all creatives. There was an architect, there was myself, and then there was a jeweler. We came up with a curriculum for the kids' school that, instead of Meet the Masters, which is only doing it every other month, and it was only doing it for the upper grades, and it was a very academic based arts program, which I found offensive because it's supposed to be the exact opposite of anything that's supposed to be academic. They already get all that, right?
Yes.
So the 3 of us proposed a curriculum to the school. It was basically, for the money you are taking and putting into this conglomerate, can we take that money and do something special? And so we did. We built this program for our kids.
Wow.
And it was the entire school, including the special needs kids. We made sure everyone got to be a part of it. And then at the end of the year, we would have a big gallery showing of what we did. And it was such a hit that all the resistance we got from the teachers and the administration before became open doors. And we were getting support from the community and got some funds. And so we were able to do a little bit more the next year. But the bottom line is in the middle of this is kind of all I was doing. I wasn't actually producing any art, but I was helping the next generation, or 10 generations later, actually be creative. It was May 12th of 2012. My daughters were having a thing down at the beach, and I was with them, and we were walking along probably a 2 or 3 mile stretch of the beach, and we were collecting different rocks and stuff. And, I had some sea glass, and one looked like amber, and that little piece of amber ended up being a little piece of white phosphorus. And that white phosphorus in its nature, when it is exposed to oxygen, will completely combust. It'll ignite. It becomes active. The theory is that this piece was so encrusted with salt and water and sand. And so even when I picked it up out of the water, because it's very tiny, it was like this big, when it was just dormant, it was still encased. But when I got home, like 2.5 hours, 3 hours later, and I was running up my stairs, the other little rocks in my pocket probably broke the seal around, and then it got oxygenated. So at the point when I'm now peeling an orange, and my husband and I are talking about who's picking up the babysitter for our date to celebrate his birthday, all of a sudden I feel like there's something biting me, like something that's the conscientious thing in my mind. The only thing that makes sense is I'm being bitten. but I feel this hot, sharp pain on my leg. And so I go to kill it, and I look down, and all of a sudden there's a white hot flame coming out of my shorts pocket. And so now I'm stepping away from the counter, and I'm saying to my husband, my shorts are on fire, get it off. And he's like, what? And I'm like continuing to try and, do you know that sound that a flare makes?
Yeah.
That sound?
Yes.
That's the sound that was coming out of my shorts right then. Thing you're trained when you're little is stop, drop, and roll.
Yeah,
so I dropped to the ground while we're both sitting there incredulously trying to figure out what's happening to me.
Yeah.
Drop to the ground, and I'm trying to roll it out, and it's just going, it's just
getting worse.
white hot, and just keep going like this with my legs. So
Yes.
this was the catalyst. This was the life altering experience, the life event that after a year of recovery, so that's now we're in 2013, and I can breathe again. Kids are now in middle school. All seems right with the world. And what comes next? And that was the question between Rob and I spent a week of, praying fervently about it. And that the message was, I want you to paint.
And you weren't even painting at this time. You were pastel artist.
And even then I wasn't even doing that really. I mean, I did a few periodically. The only art that was really in my life was teaching these kids at the school and at my private art lessons. So in that moment across from dinner, Rob's like, okay, why don't you take 6 months or a year? Let's see where this goes. And over the course of that year, so 2014 now into early 2015, I was doing, fairly realistic art, very realistic art. And I was, did my first little San Clemente Art Association show, and I, what I thought was expected, which was a lot of beach art, which that's all I saw people doing. And there it was. It was like, okay, I can do it, but I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of artists between San Clemente and certainly Laguna Beach, and then
100%.
going beyond, right? So finding not only my voice, but also finding my genre, what was that really meant to be? And it wasn't until it was probably 8 months, almost a year into the journey. I was diligent though. It was a little bit about the business of becoming an artist. And because it was foreign to me now at this point, I had to work at it. I had to cultivate and develop and strengthen that side of my brain that was not being utilized at all. And so I gave myself hours in the studio that were specific to creating.
Wow.
And it might be cleaning my brushes. It might be, conceptualizing ideas, but every day I'd drop the kids off at school. I'd walk the dog. I'd come in and I'd work for 6 hours, and then I'd come back, pick up the kids, do an art lesson, fall on the couch and sleep for an hour, and then make dinner. And that was kind of my sort of daily jam.
Did you ever feel like it was not going to work?
Oh yeah, sure. But I didn't really give myself a lot of space to consider that. I believe this was the way or not even the way, if this was what he had put before me, that this is what he wanted me to do, then I knew he had a plan and there was going to be a time frame for that. I didn't know what the time frame was, but I sort of assumed it was going to be within this year-long amount of time I had. At the point when I did that first show and Rob came and he helped me, he goes, hey, there seems to be people that are really interested in this. This could be a thing. I mean, let's be fair. I think I made $1,000 at that first show.
That's good for a show.
Yeah, but I mean, I was selling, these tiny little paintings for X amount, and I sold a few of those, but that wasn't going to help my family. I had started doing tons of research. Lots of research. I was reading up on a bunch of artists. I was reading up on a bunch of the business side of doing art. And I came across this one woman, Maria Brophy, and she was doing a blog and a newsletter that was super powerful for me. She was the most candid with most things, because at that time, 10 years ago, a lot of artists weren't sharing anything. Felt very much like the old guard was still in practice of, you figure it out. You figure it out. I'm not sharing with you. You're competition to me. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm an old lady trying to branch into an industry that is not new. This isn't foreign to me. I'm trying to figure some stuff out. I know business, I can be creative, but I don't know how to put the blocks together. So her blogs were powerful for me.
Wow.
And it turned out she ended up living in town, and she and I are now friends. And it was a real gift to me
Wow.
because during the time when she was now finishing her book was the time she and I were becoming friendly.
Wow.
On pricing and on different things. Her theory was different than another artist friend of mine. His thing was you do a per square inch price point. That's how you figure it out. It's easiest to just the most consistent, and you can just kind of gradually grow. Then I had a gallerist who was saying there are works that are master works and they should not be priced the same as every other piece you have. They should be priced differently. And so then I'm like, okay, well, I think this is a master work, but maybe somebody else does it.
Yes,
How do you
yes.
gauge that? And then I had, I was reading that book that said, you got to figure out what your hourly rate is. At the end of the day, I needed the path of least resistance. So I went with the per square inch price point. And that was effective for me. And I had a sliding scale for bigger works to smaller works. So
was it the same scale for commissions and for just regular artwork that you were creating, or was that different?
That was different.
Yes.
A commission is already going to cost you more time and more energy, and you're not doing your ideas. And so it's not as free flowing. You're waiting for approval from somebody. So there's an upcharge for a commission.
At the time, did you know that, or was that something that you learned kind of as you went?
I specifically looked up hurdles for artists or something along that line. And it was people didn't have contracts and they got screwed big time. No agreements, didn't take a deposit, didn't do this, didn't do that. So from the business side of my brain, nope, check, writing that out, figuring that out, put all those things into place. I had a binder with all my thoughts and my ideas and some of the stuff I got from articles I read. I didn't have a cohesive portfolio yet. I was working on where was I going to show as soon as I did. I was looking at all those things in front of having the work because I knew the work was going to come.
One thing that you told me in one of our past conversations was I like to think of myself as a rock star, obviously jokingly. But you actually
Carney.
No, but you meant like in the sense of like a songwriter. You're like, I like to make all my work in a set time frame, and then I take a whole year to tour with it as like a rock star would. And that really hit me hard. And I actually wrote that down in my sketchbook because it helped me organize a year in my head. At this time, when you were doing all this research, you were just drawing whatever image or painting whatever image you wanted, or did you have like a specific interest?
No, I think that was primarily when I was trying to figure out the beach stuff primarily.
Mostly,
like that I was still using brushes. I was still dabbling with my pastels, but I had my targets, things that I was looking forward to achieving. The Laguna Beach Festival of Arts was on that list. Museum shows on that list. I still have a couple of museum shows that have NYC behind their name that are on my list, but for right now there were these stepping stones, these things that I consider part of the process, the goals. And a friend of mine was talking on Facebook about doing some abstraction class that was going to be at a church of all places. That those are two foreign things to me: abstraction, art, and then a church place. And she was asking some other friends, and I was teaching, and I'm now actually considering myself a professional. I had a business card, but when I saw the post, I was like, hey, can I come? Of all of the genres of art, abstract art is probably the one I didn't appreciate or understand the most. That's probably the gentlest way I can put it.
Yes.
I used to have very strong emotional reactions when I'd go to the MoMA and different places in New York City. And I stripped away every concept and every thought that was derogatory in my mind. And I just wanted to go in open-minded. Let's see what this is going to teach me. What don't I know?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
don't I know? And probably either the first or second class, the instructor said, give your partner, you're going to blindfold yourself and your partner's going to give you a brush and they're going to pour some paint for you. And here's your canvas and you go have fun with that. The idea was it was intuitive.
Okay.
Which I found out in my brain meant purple vomit. So I took this thing. It looked like a sea snake. It was like, oh my word.
And you painted it blindfolded completely?
I'm totally blindfolded.
Okay,
And,
wow. That
and
sounds really freeing, actually.
it
Truthfully.
was. But for a card carrying control freak, it was actually a little disconcerting what was happening out on the canvas.
Yes, I can resonate with that.
Mhm. So I had this canvas that had junk on it as far as I was concerned. And I know a lot of artists who, if they don't like it, they're cutting their canvas off the stretch bars or they're, breaking things. I'm like, I'm not that destructive. I'm pragmatic.
Yes.
Well, how can I reuse this thing?
Same.
I'm a mom, for crying out loud.
Yeah, you got to be scrappy. You got to be scrappy.
Exactly. So I take this canvas back to my home studio and I have it on an easel. I'm working on other stuff, but I have it on an easel. And if the idea was to get out of my own head, what are some other things I needed to strip out of my thought process? If a paintbrush was one of them, then I wanted to get rid of the paintbrushes. Okay, let's get rid of the paintbrushes. All right. What else? What else are some misconceptions? And by the way, is every abstract artist an intuitive abstractor, or do some actually use subject? Oh, you know what? Some of them do. Actually, a lot of them do. And so I can get behind that. And I started paying attention. Oh, well, I did exercises like that in college. I can do that. Or, oh, I could do this. And you know what? There was something behind that. So that was the first time I used my old knife that I had for mixing paints from college, dusted that little bad boy off and started to just put marks that felt awkward and uncomfortable onto this canvas that already had junk on it. So really there was no ruining what was already there. And I did this piece that was kind of like water reflecting on a pond, or light reflecting on a pond. And of course, because I was so uncomfortable with the knife, it was all that my body would do in that first one.
Yeah.
But then I did another one at home, not during the class. And I was like, but look at how I can see the colors poking through from that first disjointed effort. But it was kind of interesting to me. And I could see this and I could see that. And I was like, oh, there's something kind of interesting about this. Huh.
Did you allow other people to give you feedback on those first couple paintings?
Yeah, I'm my own worst critic. If somebody's going to be harsh with me, I just assume I beat my own self up.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And even other artists, they're going to come from their perspective, right? So even in all my years of doing this professionally, I have appreciated other people's opinion, but there's very little I'm going to take in and adopt as my own personal perspective, only because my journey is different than theirs. And certainly my perspective is different than theirs. So if somebody says, yeah, I don't understand why you picked a blue Ferrari. Well, that's because I like blue.
The power of an artist.
Yeah, I guess I could do that in red, or I guess I could do it in that, or I guess I could take the quintessential angle that some 50 other people have done. This is what I like about this car.
Yeah.
But even in those early years, as many artists that we were following one another, I tried to absorb very little from what they were doing because I didn't want to adopt it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't go seeking out what other artists were doing. I didn't want to be influenced by it.
Yeah, you were in this kind of like a dreamy little cocoon of just trying to figure out your own spin on things. It seems like a short period of time. I had a year kind of where I had that cocoon feeling where I wasn't really sharing a lot, but I was experimenting and trying. And I ended up at the end of the year being super proud of what came out of that. And it was like one of the most encouraging years because I honestly didn't share that much about the process or the projects or anything. It was just kind of my own project and it helped me so much. It's got very internal situation happening, trying to find and experiment what works for you.
I think I was grateful that I was not on Instagram during that time. I mean, I was
100%.
Starting it. It was just a little bit in the very early. I had an account for my family stuff.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like Lyn Hiner Studios at that point. It was just Lyn Hiner. The trappings. And again, I think some of this is because of my age coming back into it, and how few other artists wanted to help me when I wanted to figure, when I was trying to figure some stuff out.
Totally get it.
How few, I just was like, okay, then this is actually going to be between me and God a little bit here. And I'm going to have to figure some of this out. So this class was part of that. And by the end of it, two things kept bubbling up. I wanted to do the essence of what I saw as opposed to the exact thing I saw, because that was what I was trained.
I love
That's how I was trained. And so if I can strip away all of the exact things I see and just make it the essence, how pulled back could I get to the essence? And if part of my challenge was using the brushes to not want to go in a little tighter, then what do I have to use? And the knife kept coming up. And how do I tell the story? And where does the story begin and end? And that layering process of that first piece became part of that story. It was a family member asked me, they said, we would really like to do a piece for our home. We'd like it to be kind of bright and joyful. Our house is a little dark, so it needs to be kind of bright and joyful. And I made the mistake of probably showing them the process because it was a little bit messier back then. I adopted this layering process. I did the abstract, the big giant abstract, lots of arm movement. It was a 24 by 48. It was really dark and kind of probably overwhelming, but I showed them, I go, I've just finished the first layer. This is going to be amazing. And then they're like, what is that? And I go, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine.
Yes. Oh, I've equally understood like when to share the progress picture and when to not. Because even if you're excited, that does not guarantee that your customer will be excited because they can't see what you see.
Yeah, they do not know where you're going with it.
No. You don't want to scare them.
I now say I will show you one or two, maybe two, but one for sure progress photo. And it's long into probably layers 5 through 8. But then I put the background on and I had so much fun with the background. And then there was this drippiness that was happening. The drips are an important part of the story. One of the things that came from that second big project during that class was, as I was stripping down into essence, the essence from a perfectionist point of view was getting rid of the things I didn't like. And of course, we were working with acrylic because of the class time frame.
Oh, yes.
And
quick drying.
Yeah. So we were going with quick dry as opposed to oils, which actually I found a love for them after this class. And I'm spraying down, I'm getting rid of my fail. And as I'm going to wipe it off with my towel, I'm like, if nothing's an accident, if everything's a part of the process, can I leave it there? Can I leave it there and be okay with it? Okay, I'm going to leave it there and see if I can be okay with it. Walk away from the canvas, walk away and just let it dry. And then did a quarter turn on the canvas and I started doing something else. And I started getting ready to erase something. I was like, leave it alone. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so I left it there. And between the essence and the leaving things and taking things off that were unnecessary, I started to find my voice in it. And that first one was a floral. That was the messaging for me, was if there's something that you can just find so much beauty that you want to repeat it. It became the florals for me. So that was that class that also helped to derive that piece of information. Yeah. So layering, knives, drips, and florals all came as this 4-week exercise.
What a priceless opportunity.
Right?
Yes, that's amazing. Yeah. Was the class the person that gave you the word essence, or was that something that came to you?
No, that was
came
me.
To you intuitively. Wow, that's so cool. Because I can definitely,
probably more the Holy Spirit, but yeah, that was
of course, of course.
Remember, her whole thing was intuitive painting. So we figured out intuitive painting looks like purple vomit. Yeah. We need a little direction.
Yeah. Well, so then let me ask you, there's been some articles, of course. I always read your newsletters and I go to the articles people have written on you, and a lot of your work currently is described as abstract expressionism. Yeah. Expressionism. So to me, I've always thought that expressionism and abstract art were two different categories. Is that incorrect?
They are, and they are also one.
Okay.
There is a category that's considered abstract expressionism. And I would say that my florals still fit more into that category, not recently. Okay, so what was sort of funny about the florals and then the cars, florals were very abstract and expressive. So they became that definition. They were not impressionistic. They were meant to be expressive. So they were very much that intersection.
Yes.
When I started the cars a few years later, the very first cars were very abstract expressive, so much so that some people really were having a hard time tracking with them, but other people were like loving them. Such a departure from what was out in the car sphere that it started gaining some traction. Now, the irony with it was the more I did the cars, the florals got tighter.
Yes.
And then if I would do a floral and the cars wouldn't get looser, they actually got tighter. And then I'd be like, yeah. So then I started realizing, oh shoot, they are not actually helping each other all that much, but they're still both so important. And I was having fine art shows that were strictly florals. And then I was doing the concours events and these different ways of expressing. And I actually had an artist I deeply admire and respect recently go, I love how much tighter your work is. And I was like, oh, it was like a slap across the face. I realized I'm getting off of my own track a little bit. I mean, I still love the work that I'm producing. Don't get me wrong. The whole reason I was going to the essence was to just extract exactly the joy out of what was creating. And if I keep pushing into the realism, there's no point of perfection you will ever get to. And so there's no way you can enjoy the process. At least for me, I could not enjoy the process. So that was where essence was so important.
Yes.
So anyway, so the florals then came, this first piece that I did for the family member was called Poppies. And it was the very first floral I did, and they loved it. I had so much fun doing it. Before I was even done with their piece, I had 3 other canvases going simultaneously to that one as I was wrapping it up. And all of a sudden I was prolific. I had 10 going, and then I had 20 going. And then I was like, I started realizing there was a fervor in what I was trying to do. And that was a conversation with God that I was having. The conversation with God was, this really difficult thing happened in your life. That first layer became representational of the joy and the freedom and that we realize we don't have, but we have when we're younger and we don't even acknowledge it.
Yeah, right? We don't take advantage of it as much.
Well, because you have no perspective.
Yeah.
Life is a series of perspective shifts, right?
Gosh, that's so true.
And so that first layer became that representation of that freedom that we just don't even realize we have. And then what was happening was the background of that next layer was kind of dark and moody and deep. And the whole point of that was we all go through these really heavy, difficult seasons in our life, and that the burns were mine in this particular storytelling. The burns were mine. But at the end of the day, there was still this beauty and this hope and this joy that was coming from it. Look at me. I'm actually creating art, and people seem to want to buy it. And it wasn't just like manifested inside of me. This was, I feel like, a total God ordained plan all along.
Yes.
And I needed to honor it. And it was being honored in this series of works of art. And so once I started to realize what was happening, the florals became the series that I never knew was in me, that were important, that were the conversation with God that said, thank you. And, but the journey was hard, and the journey wasn't simple, and it was not easy. And the end of 2015 is when the florals became a cohesive series. And by April of 2016 was when I was talking to a gallerist, and I had my very first showing of the work. And all the titles were representative of this place I was at in my walk, in my heart, there where God had me at that moment, as I was processing through the difficulty that was my journey healing from the burns. And so at the point when I was asked to do a card from somebody who loved the work, it was sort of the sweet gift. And I was like, well, as long as we understand, I go straight to canvas. I don't do sketches. I'll take a photo, and that's going to be my reference. And
Wow, so it was a
And
commission reach out that really gave you that first push to do automotive paintings.
they knew I was a car girl, and it was a Porsche. So that was what I knew. And I said,
That's
fun, let's
perfect.
do it. And I had so much fun. I was like, is this a thing? I wonder if this is a thing. So I did a
Yeah.
Cobra. And
Okay.
before I had the line of the car, like the hood line done on that second painting, I literally could visualize the entire collection in front of me. I was like,
Oh,
oh, I don't even know where I would show this stuff, but I can see it. I can see the whole thing. I cheekily was titling it. I just went with cars initially, just cars,
yes.
because the other woman didn't sound right, but all the titles were getting girls' names.
Oh, that's so good though. I would love that. But yes, you're right.
Now, Rob was still working at SEMA, at PRI at the time, but had been acquired by SEMA. And I had gotten re-familiarized, but friendly with a few of the guys who were working there. And they saw my post about the cars that I had been doing on my florals. They loved the florals. They were following it. They had been around when my burns had happened. Oh my goodness. If I had understood the value of the invitation by Peter McGilvery at the time to say, hey, Lyn, if I found you a spot at Art Walk, would you want it? I'm like, sure. Because I didn't
Wow.
know where I was going to
Wow.
show these, right? I mean, that was kind of the thing. Okay, I've got this idea in my head, but am I actually going to have a place
Yes.
to show them? I don't think my fine art shows are going to dig the car thing, which, by the way, I did very well with my car things at certain fine art shows.
Well, I
But
remember from doing the Sawdust Festival, just as a little girl with my mom, there was so many automotive artists there. Now I think subconsciously that played a huge role in my career.
I had two paintings that were in house that I could actually use. I
Okay.
had a Cobra and I was working on a Mustang, and it's the end of August when I get that call from
Oh,
Peter
dang.
asking. I'm like, sure. And I had
Yes.
two art shows that were going to happen in the fall with my other series, and I was finishing pieces for that. And I had a trip that I was going on. And on November, I think it was November 1st, I
Yeah.
had 7 pieces done. And again, I was treating it more like it's an art walk. It was I come from the fine art world. You don't do prints at that time. Again, I research. And so I was looking at who the other artists were in years past. And
Mhm.
what do they offer? And so I was like, oh, shoot, I'm going to have some prints. So I did 10. I did a series of 10 prints for a few of the pieces, and I sold most of them. And everyone else was going, why is that painting so bloody expensive? Because they're thinking it's a print, right? And I'm like, because that's an original. And
Wow.
I loaded up that car, my expedition, and I had one painting that was still a little wet, and I was praying it wasn't going to hit the roof of my car
See, that's so
driving
cool. I
out
love
to
that.
Vegas.
I love
And
that.
I had my first automotive showing, and I sat there kind of like, hey, everyone, how's it going?
That's
New kid on the block.
amazing. Wow. That is so
and
cool.
and so again, it was being willing to be in someplace new and different and
Mm.
uncomfortable. And I didn't want to do a ton of shows, but I did
Yeah.
find that, kind of going back to your rock star analogy,
Yeah.
right? You take the world tour, so you get out there. And I didn't do it right away, but as I started to find my traction and my positioning in the world, and what I like to do and what was important for me to do, which
Hmm.
was definitely more the vintage European cars. Those are the ones that I love. Those are the ones that I consider the most beautiful. Not to say that I don't love American cars, because I do, but the ones that I
Yes.
grew up with are the ones that I am also most comfortable in and with.
Hmm.
So I realized that that was going to be the place I kind of camped a little bit. And what was interesting was at SEMA, I was one of the few that had European models on their wall. So
Very true.
it actually turned out to be a good thing. And then I discovered what concours were, and maybe I could show. And hey, there's this event up the coast at Pebble Beach. I wonder if I could get in there. Oh, well, I'll start at a little lower bar, kind of like, my building up in the fine art world, building up to those things. And by
Do you prefer to go to a show prior to actually showing at it, or are you okay with kind of just showing up cold turkey with your vendor space?
I'd say at the time early on, I was
Yes.
like, just get her done. Amelia was where I launched the Amelia Concours. And after I did that show, I was invited to be in Pebble Beach. And
Wow.
so that was kind of the second one, and I was very honored. That all happened in 2019. So 2 years after my launch into the car series.
How many shows a year are you trying to fit in?
All right. So 2019 was the year Rob retired.
Okay.
So Rob retires, and it was also the year that, by God's grace, I had been kind of like this at a very low level of income. And it was also the year that God started providing abundantly.
Awesome.
So that does go to the countenance of when we step out in faith, things can happen. It doesn't necessarily happen in our timing, because I was looking at all the data would say, do not try and make a living at this still, even at that point.
Really?
Yeah. Even though I was doing pretty good, all the expenses of doing those shows and all the stuff is,
it's
right?
outrageously expensive to do, especially out of state shows and those types of concourse events.
But what was crazy was like everything started leveling up in that sphere. And then I got invited to do a couple of other crazy things. And one of them was the Saudi Arabia Riyadh show. And there was only 5 artists who were there, whom I became very tight with, because we were all experiencing this very rare and unusual event together, right? Well, and I'm a woman of all things. I mean, I usually don't like to have a distinction about that, because I feel like if we've earned our spot, we've earned our spot. Thinking about the culture you're going into and kind of like, well, wait, I need to pause and kind of think about this a little bit. And so Rob and I were talking about it, and I'd been suggested by one person, and then Peter was inviting me, let's do it. So we did. And 10 days, and there were some intense things that happened.
Was there a language barrier while you were trying to like market and make sales and network and stuff? How did that work?
Nope. You'd be shocked at how many Saudis actually speak perfectly respectable English. That was a little bit different experience than I think all of us thought. I still sold some work there, but it was not what I was expecting. It was an experience I'm so grateful for. We do a post-show roundup, Rob and I. I can't do every show I would ever want to do. I've had one-day shows that are extraordinarily fruitful for me to do. They are so much work. They are so hard to do. This year is the first year I've eliminated, I think, all but one-day show.
Wow.
And but in 2019 and then post-COVID 2021 and 2022, I was still doing them. I was doing a lot of them. You asked me how many shows I did. In 2019, I think I did 15 shows. COVID hit, and post-COVID was I'm saying yes to everything. It was a good thing, actually. I am grateful for all the things that happened, not the least of which was that's when Saratoga Auto Museum came calling, and I was grateful for the relationship build. But I had 2 months. I mean, from a practical point of view, I had 2 months to create a series of paintings, which I normally would ask for a year. And I had 2 months. Well, it was post-COVID world. You say yes to those things because you want to make sure that you get the job done.
Yes.
They would have been happy with whatever I gave them, but I wanted it to be in honor of what was there. So I said, send me photos so I know it's going to be there. And so from there, I picked 5 pieces and I started working those bad boys out. We are still in a relationship with one another.
You're the perfect person to ask this question to, and I had it written down in my notes while we're talking about shows and things. How do you discern whether or not to say yes to an opportunity or no to an opportunity?
Well, in 2021, there was nothing I said no to.
Yes. Out of circumstance, obviously. I mean, we're coming out of a very desolate year of doing no shows at all.
Yeah. So that was a year of 22 events. I did probably 22 or 23 events in 2022. As 2022 closed, I realized you'd asked me about burnout at one point in a previous conversation.
Yes.
I would have never, ever considered myself in a state of burnout until the end of 2022. And what was interesting is, and I would still say I battle it a little bit, because this is going to go to the discerning thing. So I will get to that.
No, that's fine.
You don't know you're on the tip of burnout when you're at that pace, because everything is working. Yes. I'm working. Everything's moving. I've got, when do you paint? Oh, well, when I'm home, I paint. I might only be home for 2 weeks, but I paint when I'm home. You're in it. You're doing it. Yes. And I had a whole 2 months off when I got home after SEMA of 2022, and I realized just how burnt I was.
Mm.
And I had shows that were scheduled initially for the end of January, and I was like, how am I going to do it? I can't even create. And I still have a collection for Amelia, and I can't even conceptualize a piece in my mind right now. And so for the whole month of November, I did nothing.
Wow.
Which is unusual when I'm home. When I'm home, I'm in the studio and I create. And I was like, I couldn't do any of it. I just was like so tired. I'm in my 50s now, but I also wasn't taking care of myself. 2021, I had written my manifesto of where and exactly what I want my life to look like in 10 years.
Wow.
At what point am I going to actually start putting these things into practice? Which means I'm going to have to start saying no to things. I'm not a people pleaser by nature, but I also consider myself a pretty loyal human being. And so this was going to start feeling a little bit like I was going to be disloyal to people who have been very supportive to me along the way. And so there was a battle internally about that. When I started to eliminate one-day events and not for any other reason other than they were super hard on me physically. It had nothing to do with what they would produce for us economically, but it was okay. I gotta take a little bit more time. I still ended up doing probably 15 to 18 shows last year, but that's still 7 shows we weren't doing. So
most people do only 7 shows or less a year. So,
or less.
Yes.
Yeah. We didn't feel that economically. I was grateful. That was where God bridged gaps. So I was like, okay, thank you, God, for that. But in 2023, we'd actually been looking for 2 years for a studio space that was not in our home because I was starting to work bigger and bigger and half my space is outside. We knew practically that a bigger space needed to happen, but unless we were going to go, a half hour away from home, I didn't know how that was going to happen. And so we'd been praying about it for a while. And could we actually afford to do something close by? And by God's grace, we found this place. And it's not like it's cheap. It's not cheap, but somehow God makes the dots connect each time we have a lease payment. And, and it's this huge gift because it gives us a place to show, because we were having clients now kind of just showing up at the house. So in 2023, this place, the studio that we now have, seemed like it was going to be too big. It was 2,500 square feet, but it had a little gallery space. It had an office for Rob. It had a huge warehouse where I could have an entire huge wall for me to work on. That's all indoor, and a whole area where we could have his shipping station, plus storage, plus a place to meet with clients, plus all the places for our giclées. And wow, I'll tell you what,
fills
I
up
would have
fast.
never guessed. Like we were thinking, if push comes to shove, we can maybe rent out part of it.
Yes.
There's not a spot for somebody else in here. There's no space for anyone else.
That just proves how much it was needed then, really.
So it's been almost a year since we took the lease. So October 1st, I can't believe it. But all that was happening in the background last year. And some new shows, like we were at Runsport and we were doing, we went out to Goodwood, and this whole deal with Japan was kind of in the background being worked on. There's always stuff in an artist's mind, and certainly if somebody who is growing and expanding, no one knows what's going on. They just assume you're sitting at your easel painting all the time.
Happily.
Joyfully and wonderfully. So the irony is this year I actually went down to 11 events, and I cannot tell you how many people have told me, I cannot believe how busy your schedule is.
Oh my God.
I'm like,
that is hilarious. You're like, you have no idea.
by half, man. I am done by half. Are you kidding me right now?
Yes.
And by next year, I hope it's cut again. But every time I cut back, it's an exercise in faith. It's an exercise of letting go of stuff that is comfortable and I know I'll make money at, and I'll do this or potentially make money at it. There's never a guarantee. But the life of an actual working artist is you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable all the way through
Oh
every
my gosh,
day.
yes.
Every
So
day.
true. Nobody told me that. Like,
No
I'm
one
so
says
uncomfortable
anything.
with change and I'm so uncomfortable with not knowing, and more so than most people. And then I'm like, I chose to be an artist and an entrepreneur. Like, an entrepreneur alone has all of those things. But then if you add art on top of it, it's like, oh my gosh. Like, it's
Yes.
the most unexpected career. Like, you like to day sometimes. And it's just crazy how many external elements affect each thing,
Yeah.
emotionally for the art making, and then economically for the business side of it. There's a lot
So
things.
you're always spinning, right?
Yes, always. And then you're always on, kind of like, at least for me, I'm always thinking, how could I make this better? It's
Yeah.
on me. I can make things better. I can do it. Like, I'm not relying on my boss to give me a raise. I am my own raise. How do you ever rest? How do you ever stop?
Rob and I have had many years. So let's be fair. He was the sole provider of so I left work in 99 to raise our family. And up until 2019, and even though I was working at that point, and I'd done other things, I'd done some consulting and I'd done some other things through the course of our married life together. But at the point when he then retired, God, I guess we're going to see where this goes now, huh?
And did he assume did he assume the role immediately? Because I know he does like a lot of the
No.
online stuff, the newsletter, things like that.
Oh, goodness. No, he was
Okay.
going to be retired. I had a couple of client meetings up in LA and he would be like, hey, I'll drive, and that way you can do some work while you're on the road. And at Festival of Arts, he's like, hey, I'll work tonight. This is fun. I get to
Oh
be
yeah.
outside and I'll do this. I'm like, I kind of think they want to meet me though. And then he's like, yeah, but you said you needed to work. And I'm like, okay, I
That's
guess we'll have a
awesome.
schedule. So when
Yes.
we were on our way to Pebble Beach that summer, I was like, so I have an uncomfortable question for you. I need to hire somebody. I need somebody to help me with, like getting the newsletters done and doing some of this stuff I'm running out of time to do. And he's like, well, I'm kind of helping you with this stuff. I go, no, I mean, I need somebody who's actually on the clock, but I want you to be retired. And we're on that drive. And he's like, we can figure this out. I go, but that would mean sitting in front of a computer again. And I know that was part of the thing that had to go for you. Well, maybe we can find somebody who can do that. We still haven't really found anyone who can do that yet. But we did just hire an assistant. It's our daughter. Both of my girls are awesome. But what has been wonderful is she's savvy on both computer and art. What she is able to do is take things off of both my plate and Rob's. But at that point, Rob was going to take all of the business side and that was going to be his lane. And then I was going to work on all art and customer side.
Yes.
And that would be my side. But I was kind of a control freak. And so it was really hard for me. I am hugely blessed by the fact that
100%.
he wants to be a part of it. One of the questions that came up during that initial conversation is, okay, it's a real question. You have to be willing to have the tough ones is, I'll be the front person. Are you okay with that? I mean, you've been the creative director and the marketing director for these huge companies for years. Are you okay? Because people are going to want to talk to me. Of course, they always assume it's him who's the artist first. But after they get through that, then they're wanting to have the conversation with me. And I'm like, are you okay with that? Because we can rename it Hiner Studios. I can strip off my name. It's like, well, that would be silly because you're the one doing the art. It's your business. I'm just helping you.
Wow.
And I was like,
Huge.
It's huge. It's a huge gift to me.
Yeah.
And he has not wavered from that. But really, I have been hugely blessed by him being my partner. He helps to shave off some sharper edges on me, and hopefully I round out some of his.
You never really explained how you got out of your burned out state. Was there an experience or a moment that happened where you can remember that was the time, or was it kind of a gradual working back in? Because all these wonderful things were happening to you. You got the studio space. You had this Japan collaboration happening in the background.
It's an important thing. And I think I didn't create for a while, which of course I had many projects. I've been very blessed with probably consistently 5 to 10 projects at all times, always in the studio. And those are all commissioned work. I mean, my projects are secondary. The ones I want to work on are secondary. So in having projects constantly, there can feel like such an intense pressure behind that. And I never want to let a person who I've committed something to down. Fluid, right? Got to be fluid. Your customers need to know you're fluid. I'm not going to get it done in a day, a week, or even a month. Even if I had nothing on my plate, I have told people, even if I had nothing else going on, I would say you're going to not see your work before 2 months are over. And that's because I like time with the work. One layer's done, the next layer's done, and I start to work from there to start shaping what's going to happen on the canvas. That takes time. And I like that part of it. I think one of the questions you had sent to me was, what does that mean to be a craftsman? And to me, it means you're not just a skilled artisan. You take time and you take pleasure in making it well. You do it right. You don't just get it out the door. For me, there's the pleasure of creating. I have a friend locally who's exceptionally successful, but he won't take longer than a week to get a job done. And I am thinking the only time that's ever happened to me is when I was pressed to get something done.
I love like the hand, head, and heart makes a craftsman, hand, head, and heart makes an artist. And it's sometimes in business, we kind of forget the heart part. Because, like you got the deadline and you got to make the payment, or you got to get the money, or however, whatever the reason is, you kind of forget the heart part. When you get a piece where you can have the pleasure part and experience the joy in creating it, it's the best of all worlds. And if you don't give your time to do that, I definitely believe it leads to burnout, because I've been there. When you become a factory.
And that was what I said to Rob. I said, there's this point in time where I'm feeling a little bit more like a production artist and not a creator.
That's such a distinct difference.
It's a very distinct difference, at least in my mind. I mean, it may not be for everyone, but it is for me. And so I had to pull back a little bit, and I kind of gave some warning to some of my clients that it was going to take a little longer to get some work done, because unfortunately I did have a couple of commitments that were time sensitive, that I had to actually have work up at Amelia. I wasn't going to show stuff I had there last year. So I had to finish some work. I want it to be great. No one was pressing me for it.
Isn't that crazy?
But I felt bad.
Yes, and we put all this dialogue in our head and in our hearts that they're going to be stressed out over the fact that we have to push it out of 2 months or 3 months, and all they care about is just most of the time, is just a beautiful piece of artwork that's done with love.
You know, I've gotten locked up on a couple of my clients of what their expectation is from me. And when I actually finally had a conversation with them about it, what I found was they didn't even have any of the things that I was thinking were going on in their heart and mind. And it took 2 whole seconds to have that, hey, what's your expectation? Like asking the question, what's your expectation here? And I've just gone through 4 weeks of lamenting in my head about what was going on in their space. They have their own junk to worry about. The irony with this is, how many times have I told my young daughters when they were in high school, and even now, your coworkers, your classmates, they are not thinking about you. They don't even care about you. They do not even realize you are a factor in anything. They are worried about their own self.
That's so true. It's such a friendly reminder.
I actually have gotten to the place where if I think there's something that needs to be spoken through, I will write a letter that gets every thought or feeling out of my head, and then I rewrite it and I thin it back down. And then by that point I realize, oh, here's the things that I actually need to say. And it strips all my emotion out of it, and it strips all the worries out of it. Okay, this is not true, right? It's whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is helpful. The point where we get to Philippians 8, here's Paul talking about what is it that is honorable, noble, worthy. All of those things are usually not what's happening in this conversation. That's what's happening in my brain. And those are the things that are destructive.
And they're projecting a poor image of your client when they're not even thinking of that. So like I've caught myself thinking poorly of a client who's not said a single word to me. And here I am in and this can relate to any creative and any relationship, really.
So the burnout thing still is not actually answered yet. It really was something I just kept having to work through, is really what it boiled down to, because I was seeing it happening. I had to let go of a couple of things, expectations of myself. I had to push them aside. And I had to remember to be grateful. I actually get to do this job.
Mm-hmm.
I get to do this, and I actually make a decent living at it.
Mm-hmm.
And those are concepts that should never be lost on anyone.
Mm.
But again, I'm not worrying about anyone. I need to answer for me.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's dude, just stop and consider where you are right now.
Mm.
I'll get teary-eyed. I'm sitting in my studio, getting to work with my husband, getting to have pay my daughter a salary. I have projects that are on the board that I get to work on. Those are real. They are very tangible. Here's how sweet God is. He gives me those tangibles because he knows that even though I have to be able to work in the faith place of not being able to see everything,
Mm-hmm.
when I go for too long of a period of I can't see it, and so therefore I need to touch it and feel it.
Mm-hmm.
He totally provides in those moments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's grace. That is this walk we're on. So when you're asking me different things about burnout and stuff, it's kind of getting my head back into a place of being grateful versus it doesn't negate the fact that I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm not still struggling through the physical and emotional, but it also reminds me to just take a heartbeat, Lynn.
Yes.
Remember who's in control here. You're not actually in control as much as you like to think you are.
Yes.
And take a breather here.
Yes.
Physically, emotionally, relationally, back away from the easel, back away from the device. Oh, this stupid thing, man.
Seriously.
Too much damage there. And let go and pay attention to what's happening in front of you. Take your kids to coffee and go on a date, go for a walk along the beach.
Yeah,
all those things I started doing.
don't feel guilty about it the whole time.
No.
Yes, it reminds me of that little story in the Bible I always come back to when it comes to rest is when Elijah goes to the tree and he takes a nap after having death threats against him and like having just a terrible time of it, and he goes away and runs away and he basically wants to die. He's so overwhelmed, and he lays down by that tree and falls asleep, and then he must have been so concerned while he was trying to fall asleep, and then the angel wakes him up and the angel's like, here's your food, and God provided. And that's the most amazing story to me. I always fall back on that when I feel overwhelmed, but you're so right. Even the biggest blessings that are right in front of you can seem so, like they're so, you don't even think about them when you're in that minute of like trying to reach that next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And when it comes to phones, that's kind of what Chris and I talked about too, is this is the breeder of thinking of what's next, what's better, how can we get better? When what you have is beautiful, it's exactly, it's more than you wanted. Quite honestly, all God really has to provide is, and he doesn't have to do this anyway, but like food, water, and shelter are like basic needs, and those are well met, for the both of us. And so here we are with all these external additional blessings, and we're still concerned, and God's probably like, snap out of it.
Dang it, Lynn.
Yeah.
That's what I always say.
No, that's a beautiful thing. I think, using gratitude to pull yourself out of burnout is a super simplistic boil down to like what actually took place. Obviously, I've been in burnout too, and it is a tall ladder to crawl out of that ditch.
Yeah, it is. But it goes back to that essence, right? It's, I can look at the 50,000 things that as a business person and artist, all of my family, all of the different things that are going on. If I come to me, all who are labored and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Are you kidding me right now? I'm trying to fix 50 things, and you're just saying, come and sit at my feet and I will give you everything you need.
Yes, the essence. That's so true. Wow, what a full circle.
Yeah. So burnout is still a battle in that I have high expectations of myself and everyone around me. Unfortunately, I know that that's a real dilemma for me, but I'm also mindful of trying to cheer on everyone who I either have the privilege of speaking to or that I get to do life with in my family. And
in your surroundings. Your reputation precedes you so much. Everybody I know that knows you has such high praise for your character. And I mean, of course, they're like, oh, she's a beautiful, wonderful artist. But before that, even, they're always like, she's just a wonderful human. She will make you feel so special. And
Thank you.
you know, as for some external validation, not that you needed it, but just to let you know.
No, but that's really kind of you to say. That's, you hope you live your life well, but you just don't know all the time. Because, like you, sitting in my studio, I'm just kind of like this.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to do this podcast is because I realized, like, after we had conversations on the phone and stuff, and same with the people I've had on here already, even in a 10-minute conversation, I felt so lifted up. And I would
Yeah.
hope that they also felt the same way, because not only were we sharing like our comical woes sometimes, but we were also sharing things that were bothering us that actually felt good to have somebody that's been there, done that. These conversations can really help a lot of people. It can really like
Absolutely.
shift the culture and the mindset around what we were talking about earlier as far as like the complications of being a full-time artist, how hard it is, the realities of it. Because again, social media, I don't know about you, but especially after I started this podcast and using specific hashtags, it's like I get these ridiculously dumb ads that are like, become
Ugh.
an artist, a 6-figure artist in a week or something like
Yes.
that. And so it just is very
60.
smoke and mirrors thing. And I want these conversations to be vulnerable and real. And I want people to know it's not easy, but it's totally worth it.
It is totally worth it. But I also know it's not for everyone.
100%.
I had conversations with people who are deathly afraid of being out in the public sphere. And I go, okay, then you're going to have to figure out how to not go on tour and do it. That's the way I figured it out. It goes back again to everyone has their journeys. I literally got invited from one thing, then it afforded me the open door to the next thing. That invitation was unexpected.
You know, there's a fine balance between, in my opinion, and what I learned from reading like the Norman Rockwell biography, that one of the major things that blew my mind is that he went to the magazine company and showed his portfolio. I always thought that they came to him. It stayed with me because I was like, if I want these experiences, it's okay to reach out to whoever needs to be reached out to potentially have that opportunity. But in the same sense, what you're saying, and I've also personally experienced this with commission work, is that a client may provide you the opportunity that is so unexpected, and they'll request something that's so out of the norm or what you would try on your own in your quiet private studio. I've personally grew so much from people trusting me in that time to create something that I would have never created otherwise. And I don't believe that that's just serendipity. I think that's God using these people in my career as, okay, look at what you can do.
Like that year of yes, it was a hard pursuit for everything. And I think at some points you also have to then have the skill to say no, which is now what we're talking about. Now, when do I start to say no, even though it's uncomfortable? Because that means that there's no income now coming regularly, or at least what I think. But again, it's where like a project that I wouldn't have even had time for, I can now do because I didn't say yes to 5 other things.
Super powerful. And I love the fact that you said it's skill, because it is a skill to say no. And it's a skill. My husband always says no is a full sentence. So tell me about this opportunity that you just announced recently with Japan.
I first met the gentleman I'm working with there at SEMA of 2021. He liked the work. He bought some prints and he went home to Japan. And I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
I got artwork in Japan. Right before SEMA of 2022, him and his business manager had sent me an email and said that they wanted to meet during SEMA of that year. And they had a proposition. Add in the language challenges. Here is these 2 fine gentlemen and Rob and I trying to have a conversation while our booth is completely packed and we have no one manning the rest of it. But Rob seems to be able to hear what's going on. So I excuse myself and I say, hey, I've got to go take care of this. And so 15, 20 minutes later, I get a lull and they, everyone bows and says, thank you very much. And they leave and Rob goes, I think they said they want to rep our artwork in Japan. And I'm like, what? What? And so for the next year, we spent the entire year navigating what that meant. And of course, we have 18-hour time differences. So we eventually realized that we have to have a translator. We started having them work out the contracts, and then we had to get IP lawyers, and we're up at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning trying to have conversations with everyone involved. And you just don't know. You just don't know these things, what this all is playing out. And even our translator was a total gift to us in that a friend had recommended him. He had lived in Japan for years, but he's American born, Japanese. And so he not only fully understood the culture, he also worked for the Commerce Department. Just a really great guy. And he
That's
ends
cool.
up being a believer. And so here we are having these meetings, and we're about to go to SEMA for 2023. We've just taken possession of this space. We don't even have anything but the warehouses emptied into this space and the studio emptied into this space, but it's not set up. We would like to come to the studio. We'll sign all the contracts. We're like, okay. Rob Hiner, we need to get a couch.
Yes,
We have no place to sit. They had done a soft launch of whether or not the artwork would be well received.
Oh, wow.
And they're showing us Tokyo Mobility Show, their biggest event in the country. They took an exhibit space and put up all the artwork, put up these red ropes, and basically just put it on display and then asked people to fill out
like a questionnaire or something.
Questionnaire. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And now they are presenting us with the outcome of this questionnaire. And it was all very positive, and they were very excited, and we're excited, but they were doing it like white glove, so elevated and beautiful.
Yes.
And both Rob and I were like, wow, we thought we put on a good show. Holy cow. These guys were like,
the real deal.
To shame. And what ended up happening was they said, we're going to do the actual launch at this event called Automobile Council. And it's a vintage car event in Tokyo, and a little smaller than Mobility, but all the heavy hitters are there. And so they said, we need you to be here. Lyn, pinky promise you'll be here. And I'm okay, I guess we'll be there. And this is in we're talking mid-February. We're having this conversation with them. We're like, I guess it's a good thing our passports are updated. Desmond, translator, our friend, can you be available for the next 10 days while we go over to Japan? And all of it lined up. And we ended up getting there on Kanpai, the full bloom of cherry blossoms. I mean, I never even thought that was a thing. Again, I go back to my old art days of everything's in Europe. And instead, this whole opportunity happens in Japan that was unexpected. And what they wanted to do was to be the distributor of my artwork there. And so they are the ones who are introducing us to Porsche Japan and Porsche, the experience centers there. They consider themselves our ambassadors.
I just think it's amazing that it's an international brand at this point that you've built.
There are some things that I would have never conceptualized. And now there are ideas that are sitting on the table, and we'll see if those come to fruition in the next year or two.
Super heartfelt congratulations from me to you, because I think that is just so cool. I'm so happy for you, and I can't wait to see what comes in the future for you. And I'm very blessed with your friendship.
Likewise.
Let's just close this out. I just want you to tell everybody where they can find you on social media, and then your website as well.
Well, I appreciate that. On Instagram, it's Lyn Hiner Cars. And then, of course, if you really want to look at the florals, then you just go to Lyn Hiner Art, because that's where it all started. Those are both of my Instagram pages. And then Facebook is exactly the same. LinkedIn is Lyn Hiner Studios, lynhiner.com. But you can also go to lynhinercars.com. That takes you straight into the cars page. So
thank you again for being here this evening. All those links will be in the description of the podcast on everywhere you listen. And I just want to thank you again for being here.
Oh my goodness, you brave soul for even doing all this. I hope you let one of us get to interview you at one point so that you get to then be the one who gets to share your side of all of it, because I think that would be a real sweet gift to the rest of us as well, because you are generous with asking all of us our journey, and I think it's important to also know yours.
Thank you for listening to The Curated Craftsman. You can support this podcast and become a member of our creative community on Patreon. If you were inspired by this conversation, please leave a review, share the show, and subscribe.